Patricia Chupko Bender's only child, Susan Robin Bender, was born in Modesto, California, on November 27, 1970. Susan, who was 15 at the time, left her family's house on April 25, 1986, to spend the weekend with friends in Carmel by the sea. To get to the Greyhound bus station at 10th and G Street, she walked alone. Susan ran into friends while she was waiting for the bus. She informed them of her coastal excursion and her intention to return in a few days. Susan used the payphone at the depot to make a call after their talk. After 10 minutes, a full-size 1977 Ford van with an olive green exterior arrived. Susan entered the car. Susan was last observed at this location. In the 1980s, it was not unheard of for a 15-year-old to have so much freedom. Susan's mother, Patricia Bender, assumed her daughter had arrived in Carmel safely and was enjoying herself with her friends. Susan's mother started to worry when she didn't make the usual phone call home. On May 1, 1986, she reported her daughter missing. The detectives quickly deduced that Susan had suffered a terrible fate. "We have certain evidence to indicate foul play was involved in Susan Bender's disappearance," a detective told the local newspaper. The same newspaper was informed by Susan's mother that although Susan had fled home twice previously, she had always returned rather quickly. Patricia said, before she vanished, "Things had been going well between us for a few months. There was no sign that she was planning to run away." She also mentioned that a male person of interest who was not identified had been discovered in possession of Susan's phone book, clothing, and diary. Patricia went on to say, "I fear she was attacked by a man who was questioned by the police, but never taken into custody. Despite having a lot of circumstantial evidence against him, they chose not to arrest him. Susan was never thought to have gone missing voluntarily by the police." In 1987, Detective Richard Ridenour, who was assigned to the case until his retirement in 2000, told a newspaper that he believed Susan was probably dead. According to an interview with Susan's mother from 1999, the police said there is little they can do without a body. That same year, Detective Ridenour said, "Susan Bender just fell off the face of the earth." The strangest thing about this case is that no information about her has surfaced in all these years, and no one has ever come forward to tell what happened to her. In 1999, two childhood friends from Linden, California, Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine, also targeted young women in and around the nearby Stockton area. There was conjecture that Susan could have been one of their victims. Many of their victims remain unidentified. Although Susan disappeared while the men were occupied with their evil deeds, it is possible that the men had anything to do with her kidnapping, even though the authorities did not know. Susan's disappearance was consistent with their victim-focused strategy. However, Susan's case had never been connected to Herzog's or Shermantine's crimes, despite years of investigation. The 1980 and 1990 saw the two evil friends go on a rampage. They may have killed over 15 people, including several women. Meanwhile, Susan's case went unresolved for almost 40 years. Investigators had conversations with friends and family who had battled to preserve Susan's story. In 2021, Susan's friend, Sandy Silveria, made the following comment: "Where is she? What was her fate? It is necessary to hold whoever did this accountable." The Modesto Police Department declared in October 2021 that they had reopened the case in an effort to find the long-lost teenager. In reviewing this case, we identified potential areas of opportunity which may assist in moving this case forward, the department stated in a statement. This encompasses the application of technological innovations. We also think that, given the circumstances of the crime, there might be previously unidentified people who could know important details about Susan's disappearance. Investigators looking into cold cases in Modesto hope that in the years since Susan vanished, more witnesses would feel inclined to come forward. In a statement released in 2022, the police department stated, "It's crucial to keep in mind that Susan was a young child living with a family. Regretfully, the family has not received justice or closure for 36 years. As an organization, it is our responsibility to help achieve some measure of closure while ultimately pursuing justice." Finally, on Thursday, August 17, 2023, Raymond Lewis Stafford was declared arrested by the Modesto Police Department. Lewis, who is now age 76, was arrested in Wills Point, 50 miles east of Dallas, where he had been residing for about 5 years on August 15, 2023. For decades, Stafford seemed to be living in plain sight. On August 10, detectives obtained an arrest warrant. However, it wasn't until Tuesday that the Van Zandt County Sheriff's Department in Texas arrived at his residence and took him into custody. He was charged with killing Susan after he was apprehended without trouble and checked into the Van Zandt County Jail. More information regarding what Modesto police believe happened to Susan was withheld. Raymond Lewis is now in detention in Texas while awaiting extradition to California. It's unclear exactly how the detective narrowed in on him as a potential suspect. The Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office is receiving different unanswered questions from Modesto police, who claim they have no further information to share. The Modesto Police Department and the Stanislaus County District Attorney were contacted by newspapers and local radio stations to find out what happened before the suspect was taken into custody, but they did not receive a response. There was no information made public regarding Susan's exact cause of death, the possibility of finding her body, or the new evidence that led to Raymond Lewis charges. The Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, the California Department of Justice, and several Texas authorities were thanked by Modesto police in a press release for their assistance during the protracted and difficult investigation. It stated that the collaborative efforts of these agencies have been instrumental in bringing closure to Susan Robin Bender's case. Detectives had a suspect almost immediately after they developed a suspicion of foul play. According to court documents filed in Stanislaus County, a month after Susan disappeared, Lewis was taken into custody on suspicion of a separate burglary, and investigators at the time tracked him down using the green van. At that time, his name had not been made public. During their investigation, they discovered that Raymond Stafford Lewis had collaborated briefly with Patricia Bender, Susan's mother. Patricia said at the time that she thought Lewis might have become close to her daughter after calling their house phone. According to court records, Patricia briefly worked for Stafford Lewis at his security company in 1985. They added that she acknowledged dating Lewis a couple of times. Susan knew Lewis well. Susan had been spotted getting into his rental van at the bus stop. Her friend, who was present at the bus station on the day she vanished, claims that she jumped into his van without hesitation. According to a former resident of Raymond Stafford's house in the 1980s, Stafford admitted to killing a woman by strangling her with a wire or cord and burying her close to the Big Oak Flat Yosemite entrance. According to court records that were obtained, he claimed to have driven to a campground close to Yosemite National Park's Big Oak Flat entrance and dug the grave. In the months following Susan's disappearance, 38-year-old Raymond Stafford filed to run for Modesto City Council. When the local newspaper inquired about his criminal history, he responded in July 1985 that it was just the consequence of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His arrest records indicated that he was wearing a badge identifying him as a private investigator and running an unlicensed private investigation company. According to Stafford, the main focus of his campaign was enacting laws that would shield kids from predators. He continued, "We do not spend any time getting the people who are harassing our children." Not surprisingly, he was not elected. Stafford admitted to filing a false police report and was found guilty of setting a business on fire 5 months later, in December 1986. According to reports, he staged a kidnapping to get out of going to court. He reappeared on law enforcement's radar in 1994. For abusing a 13-year-old girl in California, he was listed as an offender under the alias Greg Tunningley on the offender registry. Stafford was revealed to be the man in new court documents. Patricia Bender disclosed that she had always believed Stafford was the reason for her daughter's disappearance, having learned the two had maintained a secret relationship. "I have known from the beginning, when my daughter came up missing," Patricia stated. "I've been aware that he was the one behind it. I told the investigators so, but they ignored me." Patricia continued saying that for the previous 37 years, the thought had been a part of her. "Honestly, it felt like I was lost," she went on. "It appeared as though I were a dead woman walking. Hearing others talk about their grandchildren and children hurts." Patricia claimed that her motivation came from her 15-year-old daughter's memories. She recalled Susan's gregarious nature. "She was a comic. She was just a typical adolescent trying to find her place," Patricia said. Patricia Bender never gave up, but up until this point, her search for her daughter had been excruciating. She mentioned having to rely on her faith. She said, "I am appreciative. I'm happy that the system has at last made the decision to act and stop leaving me in the dark." In order to bid Susan farewell, which they have always believed she deserves, those closest to her hope to find out where she is. Her mother now states in the final act that forgiveness for Stafford is the one thing she has never struggled with. "Although it may seem strange to say, I have forgiven him for the harm he caused to my daughter. I truly have, since I don't want to live my entire life carrying that burden." Patricia claimed that a heavy cloud had been lifted from her shoulders by this arrest. "At this point, I am not excited about how the trial will proceed. I only want to locate Susan's body. My message is a simple one," she said in a closing remark. "Pay attention to your children now."
In 1998, Renee Sweeney, then 23 years old, resided in Sudbury. Sudbury is a city in Ontario, Canada. Renee was a Laurentian University music student who supplemented her education by working at an adult video store. When no one else was around at the store, she could complete her homework because it was quiet and fit into her schedule. Renee was working at the Paris Street video store on January 27, 1998. Just before 11 in the morning, a man came into the store and went up to the counter. After giving Renee 30 stab wounds, he stole $200 from the cash register. After that, the man went to clean up in the restroom. The man was shocked to discover Renee was still alive when he came out of the restroom. She was attempting to dial the emergency number on the phone behind the counter. The man decided to complete his evil deed. There was an intense struggle between him and Renee. During the struggle, Renee succeeded in scratching the man, but sadly, her wounds proved fatal. The man was observed running from the shop. Large volumes of evidence were gathered from the scene by the police, who arrived on the scene shortly after. A lightweight windbreaker-style jacket and white cotton gloves that belonged to the suspect were found nearby in a wooded area by police tracking dogs. Renee's fingernails and the store restroom both had the offender's DNA on them. Seeing the unidentified man fleeing from the store, witnesses were able to provide investigators with a comprehensive account. He was described as being white, in his early 20s, with short dark hair, weighing between 140 and 150 pounds, standing between 5 and 6 feet tall, and having a slim build. It was also thought that he wore spectacles. In the hopes that someone would come forward and identify the man, a sketch was circulated throughout Sudbury. On February 11, 1998, 2 weeks after the crime, Sudbury police declared that they had charged 31-year-old John Fetterly with killing Renee. Soon after, police acknowledged their error and let him go. It was declared the next day that the evidence was insufficient to pin John Fetterly to the crime. When more and more people became aware of the case, the reward for information was increased from $25,000 to $30,000. Even though the culprit's DNA had been gathered by investigators, the National DNA Database did not yield a match. Every 30 days, Greater Sudbury police officers kept checking the databases. In order to rule out men in the area, investigators asked them to submit a DNA sample in 1999. When hundreds of men provided their DNA to Sudbury police on December 2, 1999, it was the biggest DNA collection ever for a single police investigation in Canadian history. Michael Wayne McGray, a serial offender from New Brunswick, was identified as a potential suspect in Renee's case on March 23, 2000. He was found guilty of killing 7 other people. However, no hard evidence connecting him to Renee's murder was discovered. In an effort to gather information about the crime, Sudbury police launched the ReneeSweeney.com website on April 30, 2003. The family of Renee endured an excruciating wait for justice. In 2006, Carol Strachan, Renee's mother, released a CD of music called Remembering Renee Sweeney. In 2017, Cum Sweeney, her sister, stated that she had little memory of the hours, days, and weeks that followed the announcement of Renee's horrible ordeal. Kim received a call from her stepfather while she was at school, informing her that something untoward had occurred and she should return home. Her initial assumption was that something had to have happened to her multiple sclerosis mother. I had a bad feeling about the whole thing and wondered why I was not being told to go to the hospital instead. But I got in my car and headed home right away anyways, she explained. I would usually drive past Renee's work, but for some reason I did not that day. She knew something more was wrong when she arrived at the house and heard her mother sobbing. They told me that Renee had been shot because that's what they thought initially. So I went to grab my coat wondering why we were all just standing around the house. But then they told me she wasn't with us anymore and I just dropped to my knees. From that day forward, our lives changed forever. My mom never woke again. She said it was just too hard for her to deal with. Her condition deteriorated pretty badly after, and she never really came back from it. And in November 2017, our mother passed away without ever finding out who took her daughter's life. I wish that she had a chance to close that book, Kim said. Kim had few surviving family members after Renee's multiple sclerosis-afflicted biological father committed suicide in 1990, and her stepfather passed away recently. She claims that the fact that her own 2 small children will never have the opportunity to meet their end is what breaks her heart the most. She said they would have adored her, and she would have loved them. She ponders where Renee would be now and what she would have done with their life. I still think about it every day, said Kim. I just keep having these same questions run through my head. Why would someone do this? Why her? Is he still out there? I think that sometimes people just don't want to get involved, but I can't express how important it would be to finally get justice for my sister. She concluded, if there is any information or anyone who remembers anything, I hope they remember and realize that the case has not been closed. The Greater Sudbury Police Service revealed in 2017 that it had partnered with Virginia-based technology startup Parabon Nanolabs, which specializes in DNA phenotyping. They unveiled a composite drawing of the offender on January 23, 2017, which was made passable by DNA technology known as phenotyping. The phrase describes a method that uses DNA evidence to forecast a suspect's appearance. The composite sketch, according to Greater Sudbury Police Constable Megan O'Malley, has given authorities a more precise picture of this suspect's physical characteristics. We do know that he is of European descent, that he has light skin. He has either blue or green eyes, brown or blonde hair, and might have freckles. Following the images increased public interest in the case. Sudbury police received 360 tips from the public between 2017 and 2018. About 200 potential suspects were culled from those tips via DNA testing or other methods. In 2018, the lead investigator on the case, Detective Sergeant Robert Weston, stated, "The fact that this has gone unsolved for 20 years is mind-blowing and frustrating at the same time." He added that although it is challenging to look into a crime that occurred so long ago, he is committed to moving the case along and finding the person who committed it. The more you get involved in a case like this, you almost build a relationship somewhat with the victim. At the end of the day, the focus is on Renee. I still remain confident that the suspect will be identified. By the end of 2018, detectives had investigated thousands of tips and excluded 1,800 individuals. After 20 years, most people thought the suspect would never be apprehended. So it came as a surprise when Sudbury police announced on December 12, 2018, that they had taken 38-year-old Robert Stephen Wright into custody and were charging him of killing Renee. His DNA was identical to that of the offender. At the time of the murder, Wright was an 18-year-old student at Lockerbie Composite School. He was a lab technician in North Bay when he was arrested. When Robert Wright was taken into custody, Chief of Police Paul Pedersen stated, "We have been actively investigating information and tips throughout the past 20 years, and up until today. Wright has made a number of court appearances since then, both in May 2020 and March 2019. He was refused bail. A judge decided on October 8, 2020, that Wright's trial would take place in Sudbury. This came after his attorneys requested a change of venue, claiming that the city's extensive media coverage would make it challenging to find an impartial jury. On February 21, 2023, Robert Stephen Wright's trial finally began. Wright denied having any part in Renee's murder. He said that on January 27, 1998, in the early morning, he was concluding an exam at Lockerbie High School in Sudbury. Wright claimed that on the chilly morning after his exam, he was dressed in a long-sleeved t-shirt, jeans, running shoes, gloves, and a teal jacket. Robert Wright declared he had some free time and made the decision to visit the Paris Street adults-only video store. Wright testified that because the store's doors were covered in dark, he was unable to see inside before going in. Wright testified in court that as soon as he walked into the store, he saw video boxes scattered all over the carpet. The next thing he claimed to have noticed was that something had spilled onto the floor, but he claimed that his mind had not yet registered the possibility that it might have been blood. Wright claimed that he continued to look around the store after seeing Renee Sweeney's body lying on the ground. Robert Wright testified before the jury that he approached Sweeney's body to feel for a pulse and to see if she was still breathing. He claimed this was something he had learned as a Boy Scout. He claimed he shook Renee's shoulder with his right hand and inquired as to her well-being. But in the end, he claimed he was unable to feel anything, neither a pulse nor a breath. Wright abruptly claimed to have retreated from Renee, overwhelmed. He admitted to the court that he was terrified when he saw blood on his jacket. "I ran because I was terrified," he testified in court. "I was a foolish child. I wished I had stayed. I'm not sure what was going through my mind. At that point, I felt completely overwhelmed. All I wanted to do was get away." Wright testified before the jury that he had to steady himself after backing away from the body and that he couldn't recall what he was holding. Since a fingerprint matching Wright's DNA was discovered on a cash tray on the counter, Wright was questioned about it. Wright added that he wasn't sure what he grabbed onto while attempting to steady himself and that he wasn't aware of the tray. Wright denied stealing anything from the store and denied flipping the money clips on the cash tray up. The next thing he recalled, he claimed, was squatting down, grabbing his steel jacket and gloves, and taking off. He was questioned about his decision to throw away his gloves and jacket. At that moment, I became aware that I had fled a crime scene, and I was afraid I would be charged. I've never made a worse choice than to run. I'm not even sure if I made that choice on purpose, he said. Following that, Wright claimed he had considered visiting a friend's house for a short while but changed his mind because he didn't want to involve anyone else. He claimed that from the city center mall in downtown Sudbury, he rode the first bus home to Valcaron. Wright claimed that when he got home, the house was empty. He testified in court that he never disclosed what had happened to anyone, not even his parents. All I wanted to do was put the whole thing behind me and move on. It was extremely traumatic. I was embarrassed to run, and I also didn't want to worry them. The story by Robert Wright had a lot of contradictions. How his DNA ended up in the restroom and under Renee's fingernails was not explained. Furthermore, it did not clarify how his fingerprints came to be beneath the cash box. Moreover, no other person was observed at the crime scene, and no additional DNA was discovered. He was found guilty of every charge brought against him on March 29, 2023. The jury deliberated for slightly over a day before returning its verdict in the Sudbury courthouse. A cheer erupted from the Sweeney family's side of the courtroom, and people began giving each other heartfelt hugs. Wright's father waved meekly, and his mother had tears in her eyes as they watched their 43-year-old son being led out of the courtroom by police officers. Reporters were informed by Kim, Renee's sister, and her smiling family friend Kelly Irvin that they were overjoyed and ecstatic with the jury's verdict. Following the verdict, Kelly Irvin declared, "After what horribly happened 25 years ago, Renee Sweeney got justice today." On June 29, 2023, Judge Robbie Gordon sentenced Robert Stephen Wright to 25 years in prison. The final words in Renee's victim statement came from her sister, Kim. "Do you know what it's like to have lost your best friend? I have searched the English dictionary for words to express the misery that losing Renee has brought to my family, but none exists. I had to be reminded of the brutality by glancing at that jacket that had my sister's blood on it. I'm requesting that you give him the harshest punishment you can. A quarter of our lives have been lost. He ought to be given 25 years to reflect on his actions."